Welcome to the Father Jim Clark Show, here on Heavens Road FM, the UK's fastest growing Catholic radio station.
Well, there was some dramatic music for you, and the reason for the dramatic music is that I'm hoping that this is going to be quite a dramatic interview, because today I have got the CEO of CARITAS Diocese of Salford with me. He is Mr. Mark Wiggin. So, Mark, you're very welcome indeed.
Yep, thank you for having me on the radio.
Pleasure. There's lots of things that I would like to know about CARITAS, and I hope that the questions I ask will unfold those answers as we go along. But firstly, perhaps you could just give us a bit of an introduction to your background and when you began as the CEO in Salford.
Well, thank you. I started 7 years ago as the director of CARITAS Diocese of Salford, which is a newly formed charity created from the old Catholic Children's Rescue Society and also the Catholic Welfare Services of the Diocese of Salford. So we go back an awful long way, in fact back to 1864, but we were really constituted in about 2008 as the new Caritas, which was very much in keeping with the idea that we needed to sort of recreate and reinvigorate our mission as a charity for the Diocese of Salford.
And what was your background before you came to that job?
Well, I've always worked for the Catholic Church,
right,
and for many years, and when I trained as a teacher originally, I spent some time in Uganda in East Africa working for a local bishop there called Bishop Patrick Kihangiri, who was a lovely bishop of a place called Gulu Archdiocese in northern Uganda. And when I came home from that missionary work, I started looking around for things of a similar nature, and I picked up on the Archdiocese of Liverpool's Catholic Youth Service, and I ran their residential centre in Clitheroe in Lancashire for about 10 years as a pastoral centre for young people.
Right.
And then from there, I moved into working with various Catholic charities in Lancaster Diocese. And then my last move was as the CEO or director of Catholic Care Leeds, which I was there for 5 years before moving back into my own Diocese of Salford.
Right. I can't believe it's 7 years ago since Caritas was kind of brought to the diocese. And, you know, you mentioned the kind of the historicity of it with the Catholic Children's Rescue. But there's an awful lot now. Under the Caritas banner or under the umbrella of Caritas, there's a lot of things now, isn't there, that has kind of come under, you know, what is technically your role. So just tell us about some of the different aspects or some of the different work that's going on in the diocese that now come under the Caritas umbrella.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Caritas has about 21 different projects that are made up from 3 charities, fundamentally. One is Catholic Children's Rescue Society that I mentioned earlier, which was very much orientated around adoption work, fostering, residential work with children, and later the development of school social work. Then in the Catholic Welfare Societies was much more work with adults, older people, and community work, especially with the homeless, such as Cornerstones.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, there's St. Joseph's Mission to Deaf People, which was a charity that was incorporated into Caritas. So they're the sort of underpinning bones on which we've added a little bit of flesh. And the flesh that we've added onto that is a variety of community and parish-based projects. Some of them are entirely on a voluntary basis. Some of them are generated by part-time workers. But in essence, I'd say we're in 4 areas of work, basically. We're in work with older people. We're in work with the homeless and people experiencing destitution. We're into community work, mainly with families on low incomes. And then we are into our work with schools through our school social work services, working primarily with children through counselling and supporting their families.
Right. I recently actually interviewed one of the ladies who helps run Cornerstones, and one of the things that I asked her about there was how many staff they had and how many volunteers they had. And I think there's only 2 full-time staff and a couple of part-time staff, and then the rest of them are all volunteers, which it kind of staggers me. You know, obviously I know Cornerstones well, and I've explained to our listeners just how huge a place it is and the kind of walkthrough of people that go in and out of there. But tell me about Caritas in general, about the staffing levels that we have, and again, how much dependency the work that you do is on volunteers, and maybe where you get those volunteers from.
Yeah. Well, for every one member of staff, we have about 5 volunteers.
Right.
And the example that you've taken of Cornerstones is that in that case, for every one member of staff, we have about 10 volunteers.
Right.
So within the charity, as registered volunteers, we have about 500. And there are about 90 staff, of which about 45 are full-time and 45 are part-time. So we're quite a big charity, so to speak.
Indeed.
And we have quite a big pay bill. But as time moves on, we've been moving away from contracted services with the local authority to much more voluntary-based, responding to local need, and therefore looking to fundraise through working with grant makers and trust makers, and also appeals to the community and people to support our work. So it's a small miracle that we keep going under these difficult times of austerity, but we're faced with an interesting challenge of finding the resources to do more and more work that the local authorities are no longer doing because of their own cuts and austerity measures.
Yeah.
And in particular, there's a growing need around what we'd call destitution, in other words, people with no recourse to public funds, particularly through migration, asylum seekers, refugees, but also families on low incomes and families where there's been perhaps sort of breakdown in family relationships that have left people in crisis.
I think really, going back to the work that I knew that the Catholic Rescue did, that's always been kind of part of their remit. But what you're suggesting, I think, if I'm hearing you right, is that those kind of problems are growing, maybe because of the austerities that we're going through, maybe the kind of modern breakdown of marriages that we've had, and the kind of the relationships between adults and bringing children into the world. Is that something that you've seen in the time that you've been with Caritas, that these kind of issues, these kind of problems are definitely on the increase?
The problems, I think, have always been there. I think what's happening is that less and less of the time this is becoming the remit of the state, so to speak, with state intervention through social work services, etc. Those things are seriously diminishing, and local authorities are becoming more signposts to people like ourselves in the voluntary sector.
Right.
In terms of there's always been family breakdown, there's always been destitution, but the scale of it has definitely been increasing over the years. So, for example, going back to Cornerstones, 5 years ago, you might have seen perhaps about 50 people rough sleeping on the streets of Manchester.
Yeah.
The estimation today is between about 150 and 200 people.
Right.
So just responding to that level of need is a great taxation on our resources, and that's why we're not going to meet that by always paying somebody to do the job. What we've got to do is develop a response in our community, and in our case, particularly through our parishes and through our schools, that help people think about what voluntary work, what contribution they can make to their Christian commitment to charity, and hopefully they can make that through organisations like Caritas, alongside our partner organisations like the SVP, Revive, with homeless people and refugees, and a whole raft of charitable activity that always takes part in the parish. And that's one of the things I would like to emphasise about the role of Caritas. We're not there to take the place of good works going on in parishes, but ultimately we're there to support those good works and help people express their faith through love and action.
Right. CARITAS came to like 6 or 7 or 8 years ago here in Salford. Is it something that's been unrolled? Is there a CARITAS? We are CARITAS Diocese of Salford. Is there a CARITAS in every diocese now? Is that a model that's been rolled out across the country?
It's a model that's being rolled out, and CARITAS Diocese of Salford is the first CARITAS organisation to do with the diocese in this country.
Right.
So in 2008, when we created the Constitution, we were the first diocese to take the name CARITAS, which means love and charity. And in doing so, we were aligning ourselves with the global mission of the Catholic Church that calls itself CARITAS through CARITAS International and through CARITAS Europe. And collectively, the dioceses around the world that have a CARITAS organisation collectively form the largest humanitarian and aid organisation in the world after the Red Cross.
Right.
So we're following in the footsteps of particularly countries that were developing responses to poverty and need and calling themselves CARITAS. And to go back to your question about how is that mission developing in this country, well, as I say, we were the first, but since then CARITAS Westminster has emerged, followed by CARITAS Middlesbrough. Very recently, CARITAS Portsmouth has established itself, and the latest one to announce itself, or will shortly be announcing itself, I believe, will be CARITAS Shrewsbury Diocese. So there are other dioceses that have started branding some of their work as CARITAS. So, for example, in Liverpool, our sister organisation is Nugent Care.
Yeah.
And Nugent Care have decided to call its community work CARITAS. And in the Archdiocese of Birmingham, there is a collective umbrella of CARITAS Archdiocese of Birmingham, which is concerned with the social action of that diocese. So in terms of a brand identity, it's growing, but it's still got a long way to go before people understand it in the same way as they might readily understand the word CAFOD.
Interesting to listen to you speaking there, because I remember, like I said, I interviewed one of the ladies from Cornerstones, but I also spoke with two of the people that make use of Cornerstones down there. And one of them was a young man who went to social services, having had, I think, some kind of breakdown in his family life, ended up living on the streets with nowhere to go. They couldn't help him and just kept saying, no, we can't help you. But you might find help at Cornerstones. So obviously the government passing people off onto, the likes of the Catholic CARITAS Diocese of Salford. And I just wonder, is it right, really, that the government do this without taking social responsibility for these people? For instance, yesterday, and it's kind of shocking when you see this, it was only yesterday I was driving out of Manchester and took a different way home than I would normally do. I came around the back of Piccadilly Station and saw, for the very first time in Manchester, about half a dozen tents up under the railway arches. Never seen it before. I've seen it in Paris, but never seen it in Manchester. And it is kind of shocking to see people living in tents on the pavement there under the arches. And just makes you wonder, is it right that the government are not taking, responsibility for these people? And quite happily and as quick as a flash, maybe it's the world of austerity that we're living in, passing them over to the likes of CARITAS.
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. I think my answer would be in two parts. The first part would be to say that, generally speaking, with the austerity measures and cuts to local authority funding, they are unable to provide essential services like they used to, and they are now looking to the voluntary sector and the private sector to find solutions to problems which were, at one point, in the remit and responsibility of a local authority.
Right. The
other part two of my answer would be to say that increasingly, as there are restrictions and calls upon resources, the